In the southeastern part of Nigeria, there was a small village called Umuok. It was a quiet place surrounded by green forests and rolling hills. The people lived simple lives, farming the land and fetching water from the river that flowed through the village. Everyone knew each other, and life moved at a slow and steady pace, guided by their traditions and the red clay paths that connected the huts. In this village lived a girl named Akunne. From the moment she was born, everyone thought she was special. When people looked at Akunne, they only saw perfection. Her beauty stopped everyone in their tracks, her smooth, dark skin glowed under the morning sun, and her laughter. It had a way of filling the air, making it feel like the village itself had joined in her joy. She had this aura about her, something that made people believe she was destined for greatness. And for the longest time, everyone believed it. Why not? Akunne was everything. It wasn't just her beauty that stood out. Akunne was smart, too smart for her own good, some might say. She was always the best in her class, always coming home with a prize or a new story about how she answered the teacher's questions. Although the village had only elementary and grammar college, Akunne tells her friends and family all the time that she would go to the university in the city and become a doctor. One day, I will build a hospital here, she would say. Nobody in our village will have to travel to the city to see a doctor anymore. And when she said it, you couldn't help but believe her. Akunne wasn't just dreaming, she was planning. Then there was her dancing. If you've never seen Akunne dance, it's hard to explain. She moved like the music was part of her, like the drums and the flutes were made just for her. At every festival, people waited for her to step into the circle. And when she did, it was like magic. Her feet tapped to the beat, her hips swayed with grace, and her arms told stories that words could never express. The men would stare, the women would clap, and the children would try to copy her moves, though none of them could ever do it the way she did. Her father, Motsi Kolu, a man who rarely showed emotion, became a different person when it came to her. He would sit at the front of every school event, his eyes fixed on her, his chest swelling with pride. "That's my daughter," he'd say, loud enough for everyone to hear. And everyone did hear because, well, Akunne was always the star. At home, she was his favorite too. Oh, he tried to hide it, but it was obvious. He'd bring home little gifts for her, beads, fabric, even native dainties, and his face would light up whenever she thanked him with that radiant smile of hers. But there was something about Akunne that most people didn't know. She wasn't just good at everything, she had to win. It wasn't enough to try her best, she needed to be the best. And for a long time, she always was. Whether it was school, dancing, or anything else, Akunne always came out on top. Until she didn't. But that's the thing about being a star, people only see your shine, they never stop to wonder what keeps the light burning. That was Akunne's reality. Everyone saw her as perfect, so no one thought she needed help or guidance. The villagers adored her, the young ones copied her every move, and the elders used her as an example of how a daughter should be. And the men. The young men in our village practically tripped over themselves for her attention. It was both amusing and exhausting to watch. But Akunne. She only had eyes for Obi. Obi was everything a man in Umuok aspired to be. He was strong, sharp-tongued, and dangerously charming. He was the chief's son, a skilled wrestler who had never been defeated in the ring. Wrestling was a big deal in our village. It wasn't just about strength, it was about wit, strategy, and pride. And Obi had it all. The way he carried himself, his broad shoulders, his quick smile, his deep voice that seemed to echo even when he spoke softly, it was no surprise that women flocked to him. They'd giggle at his jokes, blush at his compliments, and find any excuse to linger near him. But Akunne didn't like to share, not with anyone. It didn't help that Obi made no effort to hide his interest in her. He'd follow her with his eyes whenever she passed by, call out her name during festivals, and tell the other men, loud enough for her to hear, that she was the only girl in the village worth wrestling for. But Obi wasn't the kind of man to commit to just one woman, and everyone knew it. He had a way with words, sweet and sharp, and he used them generously on all the girls who fawned over him. Akunne pretended not to care, but it was obvious for anyone who cared to see, the way her eyes darkened when she caught him laughing with another girl, the way her smile tightened when one of them giggled at his jokes. Akunne wasn't used to feeling second best, not in anything, and certainly not when it came to Obi. She was determined to win his heart, not just in part, but entirely. She wanted him to see her and only her. And the more he flirted with other women, the more desperate she became. She stopped smiling as often, stopped laughing as freely. She became restless, always watching Obi, always scheming. At first, it was just harmless, just her way of trying to win him over. But then she did something I never thought she'd do. Something that changed everything. It all started innocently enough. One sunny afternoon, Akunne and her friends were headed to the stream, their laughter ringing out like music as they balanced clay pots on their heads. The air was light, and so was their chatter, until they saw Obi. He stood by the palm tree near the path, his wrestling scars gleaming under the sun like badges of honor. His presence had a way of silencing the giggles, turning their laughter into shy smiles and sideways glances. But Obi wasn't there for all of them, his eyes were fixed on Akunne. "Akunne, come," he said, his deep voice cutting through the rustle of the leaves. Akunne's friends exchanged curious looks as he gestured for her to step away. She hesitated, but the gleam in Obi's eyes was hard to ignore. He was confident, almost cocky, but there was something charming about it. With a nod to her friends, she stepped aside to join him. When they were far enough from the others, Obi leaned in, his voice soft yet teasing. "Akunne, you know you're the only girl I see, the only girl I want. But how will I know you're mine if you don't show me?" Akunne raised an eyebrow, unsure of what he meant. "What are you saying, Obi?" "I'm saying," he replied, his tone shifting into something more serious, "a kiss. Just one kiss to seal it. After that, you'll be mine, and I'll be yours." Akunne blushed, her heart racing. She knew what her father would say about such things, but Obi's gaze held hers, and before she could think too much, she nodded. The kiss was brief, almost shy, but to Obi, it was a promise. From that day on, their love story began. They became inseparable, finding ways to sneak out and meet under the moonlight. They'd whisper secrets, share dreams, and lose themselves in each other's arms. It was thrilling, exciting, a kind of love Akunne had only heard about in songs and stories. But over time, the kisses and tender moments weren't enough for Obi. He wanted more. "You keep holding back, Akunne," he said one night, frustration in his voice. "If you don't give me what I need, I'll find someone who will. Maybe Uju will." That name stung like a slap. Uju was everything Akunne hated, beautiful, yes, but cunning and dangerous. She always seemed to have a plan, a way of twisting things to her advantage. If Obi started spending time with her, Akunne knew it wouldn't end well. Desperate and unsure, Akunne turned to her closest friends, Obiageli and Ngozi, for advice. They listened as she poured out her heart, her voice trembling with fear and frustration. "He wants me to sleep with him. I am not ready to give up my virginity, and you know what happens in the village if we get caught," Akunne explained worriedly. Obiageli sighed, placing a hand on Akunne's shoulder. "Men like Obi are not patient, Akunne. If you love him, you should give him what he's asking for." Ngozi nodded in agreement. "Do you really want to lose him to someone like Uju? She'd take him in a heartbeat, and you know it." Akunne stared at her friends, her chest tight with uncertainty. She knew they meant well, but their words left her feeling more torn than ever. Deep down, she wondered, was keeping Obi worth the price she might have to pay? Some decisions are made in a moment, yet their weight lingers forever. For Akunne, agreeing to Obi's wishes was one of those decisions. She knew the risks, understood the weight of the taboo, but the fear of losing him, to Uju of all people, clouded her better judgment. With Obiageli and Ngozi's encouragement, she convinced herself that it was the only way to secure her love, even though her heart warned her otherwise. To avoid suspicion, they decided to meet during the New Moon Festival, a night when the entire village would be at the playground. The festival was a grand celebration, a time of laughter, music, and dancing. It was the perfect cover. No one would notice if two people slipped away into the darkness. That night, the village came alive. The sound of drums filled the air, and the playful chatter of children mixed with the rhythmic stamping of feet on the sandy ground. Masquerades leapt and spun under the torchlight, their colorful costumes shimmering like spirits in the night. Akunne, dressed in her finest wrapper and beads, looked every bit the star she was known to be. But tonight, her mind wasn't on the dancing or the wrestling matches. It was on Obi and the plan they had made. They waited until the festival was in full swing, until the laughter and music drowned out everything else. Then, while no one was watching, they slipped away, weaving through the shadows until they reached a secluded corner of the village. It was dark, quiet, and far enough from the noise of the festivities to feel like another world entirely. Akunne's heart pounded as they stood there, the reality of what they were about to do sinking in. She looked at Obi, his face half lit by the faint glow of the moon. He reached for her hand, his touch both firm and reassuring. "Trust me," he whispered, his voice low and steady. And so, she did. What followed was a moment that Akunne had once thought would be magical, but instead, it felt heavy, rushed, and wrong. The warmth and excitement she had always felt with Obi were replaced by something else, something she couldn't quite name but that left a hollow ache in her chest. When it was over, they sat in silence, the weight of what they'd done pressing down on both of them. Obi broke the silence first. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice unsure, almost timid. Akunne nodded, but the tears welling in her eyes told a different story. She couldn't speak, couldn't find the words to express the knot of regret and shame tightening inside her. All she could do was pull her wrapper tighter around herself and look away. From that night on, things between them were different. The stolen glances, the easy laughter, the whispered promises, they were all gone. In their place was a tension they couldn't shake, a distance they couldn't close. Akunne avoided Obi as much as she could, and when they did cross paths, neither of them could meet the other's eyes. For Akunne, the regret was a constant, gnawing presence. She had thought giving in would bring them closer, but instead, it had built a wall between them. And deep down, she knew this was only the beginning.